The Netherlands pledged 500 million euros to the Ukrainian drone line project for UAVs that Kyiv urgently needs to stop Russia at the front lines, stated the Dutch Minister of Defense, Ruben Brekelmans, on Sunday. He visited Kyiv on March 30th to meet with his Ukrainian counterpart, Rustem Umerov, to discuss the Netherlands' unwavering support and to announce an acceleration package worth 2 billion euros for the year 2025.
Ukraine basically needs more of everything: ammunition, armed vehicles, drones, air defense. And we as Europeans, but also the United States, we need to keep up our deliveries. We also see that Russia is putting more and more equipment, more and more troops, more and more of everything at the battlefield. And we need to make sure that Ukraine can negotiate from a position of strength. And that's why we already made 3.5 billion available for next year, but we shift 2 billion of that budget already to this year to make sure that we can do more now.
The drone line project was launched on March 3rd at the request of the Ukrainian president and is coordinated by the Ministry of Defense, the Ground Forces, the State Border Guard Service, and the Ministry of Digital Transformation. Its main objective is to create a strike zone 10 to 15 kilometers away from the front line to complicate the Russian advance and reduce Ukrainian losses. Russian troops attacked Kharkiv again with Shahed drones. This was reported by the regional governor, Oleg Sinyahubov. He stressed that a new week for Ukraine's second largest city began with strikes, as 2 waves of attacks with a total of 5 hits were recorded. 3 men were injured and received first aid on site of the attack. According to Sinyahubov, 5 industrial facilities of an enterprise were damaged, with a large fire breaking out as a result of the attack. 11 high-rise buildings were also damaged, as well as 2 kindergartens. Kharkiv also suffered from Russian attacks over the weekend. 2 civilians, a man and a woman, were killed and 35 people were injured. Among them were 5 children. Moscow troops attacked the city and the region on Saturday evening with more than 20 attack drones and 6 guided aerial bombs, damaging apartment buildings and private houses.
I thought that it was gliding around to find where to hit. I ran into another room when there was a strike. I was hit by a shrapnel and a wooden bar fell in front of my face. That's when I said my goodbyes. I think I have a concussion.
Among the Russian targets was a military hospital in Kharkiv.
Once again, the Russian Federation has committed a crime in violation of international law, the Geneva Convention, Annex No. 1, Articles 12 and 15, which prohibits the use of aerial weapons against civilian and military medical facilities and medical transport.
According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces, as a result of the attack, there were injuries among the servicemen undergoing treatment in the medical center. However, despite the damages, Ukrainian medics continue to provide assistance in the facility.
The center continues to provide assistance. Final material and technical losses are being determined.
U.S. President Trump is reportedly considering new tariffs on Russian oil imports due to ongoing concerns over the war in Ukraine and recent comments made by Russian leader Putin. According to NBC News, Trump stated this in a phone call with NBC anchor Kristen Welker.
Just hours ago, President Trump called me to tell me he is, quote, pissed off with Russia's President Putin and threatened to impose secondary tariffs on Russia's oil.
As Welker reported, the statement was made by Trump after the Kremlin leader Putin criticized the credibility of President Zelensky's leadership. Trump warned that if a peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine cannot be reached, and if he determines Russia is at fault, secondary tariffs would be introduced.
I think he'll be okay. But if he isn't, I was disappointed in a certain way. Some of the things that were said over the last day or two having to do with Zelensky, because when he considers Zelensky not credible, he's supposed to be making a deal with him, whether you like him or you don't like him. So I wasn't happy with that. But I think he's going to be good. And I certainly wouldn't want to put secondary tariffs on Russia, but if they were put on, it would not be very good for that.
U.S. pastor and President Trump's spiritual advisor, Mark Burns, visited Kyiv following an invitation from Ukraine's chief rabbi, Moshe Reuven Osman. Together, they went to Bucha, Irpin, and Berdyanka, where, according to Osman, Mark Burns could see the consequences of the Russian army's crimes against the civilian population with his own eyes and personally hear the stories of those who survived the occupation. On his Instagram page, the American pastor described the war in Ukraine as a humanitarian crisis beyond politics, emphasizing that real people are dying regardless of political affiliations. He also stressed that soldiers on the front lines are not asking for money, but for tanks, fighter jets, anti-air weapons to shoot down the drones that still fire at civilian buildings and kill people. Finnish President Alexander Stubb proposed April 20th as the date for a complete ceasefire in Ukraine. While in London, he mentioned that he already discussed the matter with Trump during a recent visit to the United States.
Why 20th of April? Because we need a deadline, because it's Easter, and because President Trump will have been in office for 3 months.
According to Stubb, if Russia refuses to agree to a truce or violates one, a robust sanctions mechanism will be essential. The Finnish president added that the United States is already preparing such measures. The main tasks of the Ukrainian armed forces continues to be holding defense lines and stabilizing the situation in the threatened frontline directions. This was reported by the Ukrainian commander-in-chief, Alexander Syrsky, after a meeting on defense forces results in March. He stressed that since the beginning of the month, artillery units conducted nearly 100,000 firing missions, UAV operators more than 81,000 special combat missions, including 158 hits by deep strike means. Also, according to Syrsky, progress was made in March in the Pokrovsk direction. Russia is doing everything it can to not end the war, stated the head of the Ukrainian presidential office, Andriy Yermak. On his Telegram page, he stressed that Russia is violating the energy ceasefire and delaying the end of the war by attacking civilians and continuing active operations on the front line. According to Yermak, Ukraine has long proposed a comprehensive ceasefire and demonstrated its readiness for a just peace. Sweden announced the largest support package to date, valued at $1.6 billion, reported the Swedish Defense Minister Paul Jonsson on Monday. He wrote that the package includes, among other things, support for Ukraine's air defense, artillery, satellite communications, and maritime capacity. The new aid also includes MAG-58 machine guns, ammunition, and approximately 100 vehicles of various types for air-based maintenance. The Swedish Defense Material Administration will also be tasked with identifying, testing, and funding military solutions from small tech companies that need to be verified or scaled up for military purposes in Ukraine. Through this, Sweden is establishing a form of Dragon's Den for military support to Ukraine, noted Jonsson.
Now we are at the critical stage of the war. All our focus is on supporting Ukraine as much as possible, so that they can get into a position of strength during these negotiations.
Ukraine marks 3 years since its defenders liberated Bucha in the Kyiv region. The city was occupied by Russian forces for 33 days. After Moscow's troops were forced out of Bucha, the whole world saw what the Russian occupation had left behind. Civilians laid out on the streets, tortured and killed. Graves were made in the yards of ordinary homes. According to the BBC, the report of the Bucha Archives Department said that from the beginning of the Russian full-scale invasion until its deoccupation, 381 people died in the city of Bucha alone.
In just 30 days of occupation, more than 9,000 war crimes were committed in the Bucha district. 1,800 civilians were killed, including 43 children, and 3,800 buildings were destroyed. According to the results of the investigation of these criminal proceedings, 178 people were reported as suspects, and 21 war criminals were convicted.
The Ukrainian president and the First Lady, along with foreign delegations, honored the memory of Ukrainians killed by Russian forces in Bucha.
More than 183,000 crimes related to the aggression of the Russian Federation have already been registered, and this is without access to a significant part of the temporarily occupied territory of our state. There are still thousands, maybe tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of crimes.
Parliamentary representatives from all over Europe arrived in Kyiv on March 31st. They were greeted at the railway station by the head of the Ukrainian parliament, Ruslan Stefanchuk. Among those who arrived are speakers and deputy speakers of 17 countries and the European Parliament. According to Stefanchuk, this visit is a strong symbol of support, solidarity, and trust, and he is grateful to his colleagues for the willingness to stand by Ukraine.